Can't sleep? Me neither. I'm Carl Gustav Jung, Swiss psychiatrist, spiritual overthinker, and reluctant expert in dreams, shadows, and awkward childhood memories. And tonight, I'm going to tell you everything. Yes, really, the full story. How I went from talking to chairs as a child, to arguing with Freud about the shape of the soul, to drawing mandalas in the Alps while hallucinating about a feathered serpent. There will be tea, there will be ghosts, there will be a talking shadow, and possibly a very judgmental bookcase. So if you're hoping for a nice, quiet bedtime story, well, too bad. You're getting mine. Now don't worry, I won't shout. That's not how I operate. I whisper. I drift. I let things emerge, slowly, like symbols in a fog. This won't be a lecture. There won't be any footnotes. Just a soft descent into the strange furniture of my unconscious. And maybe yours. Because the thing is, we're all connected, you and I. Not on social media, not through matching birth charts, but through something older, deeper, a kind of secret shared library that no one remembers joining. Still awake? Fascinating. I thought the bit about the serpent would have knocked you out cold. But since you're still here, let me make you a small offer. If this peculiar midnight monologue is even slightly soothing, or even just weirder than whatever your brain was doing before, feel free to like and subscribe. Yes, I know, even I cringe a little saying that. But even archetypes need the occasional pat on the back. Now, where was I? Ah, yes, my shadow. She's here, by the way. She never really leaves. She's sitting at the foot of my bed, sipping my chamomile tea and shaking her head slowly, like I've just embarrassed her in public. That's her role, you see. She remembers things I don't want to. She's the archivist of every moment I'd rather repress. My envy, my fear. That time I tried to explain synchronicity to a cat. She stores it all. And tonight she insists I begin at the beginning. So, here it is. I was born in Switzerland, in a quiet little town by the water, where the clocks ticked nervously and the clouds seemed to carry secrets. My father was a pastor, a kind man, full of answers, most of them memorized. He spoke of God, duty, salvation. But there was a weariness in his eyes, like someone who kept talking so he wouldn't have to listen. My mother, well, she believed in ghosts, not in the poetic sense. In the literal, they sometimes live in the attic sense. She spoke to them occasionally. Once, during a thunderstorm, she said the ceiling was warning her of something. She wouldn't say what. I respected her discretion. Between them, I was a quiet child, thoughtful, often suspicious of chairs. I had the distinct impression that the furniture in our house was watching me. Not all the time, just when I looked away. Once, I was certain a cabinet had sighed in disapproval after I dropped a spoon. I apologized. The cabinet did not reply. My first real friend was invisible. He wore robes, spoke Latin, and insisted I call him number 2 personality. He appeared shortly after I realized that none of the adults around me were particularly interested in talking about the symbolic structure of dreams. Number 2 had strong opinions about the soul, Plato, and the tragic state of modern shoemaking. Most children play with dolls. I debated metaphysics with a ghostly Roman who thought I was underqualified, but I wasn't lonely. I was preoccupied. The world felt layered, as if behind every wall was another room, and behind that room, a forest, and behind the forest, something ancient, waiting. I had questions, so many questions, about why people lied, Why dreams felt more important than homework. Why I sometimes knew what someone would say before they said it. Why I felt watched, not in a paranoid way, more like a sense that reality had eyes. And then came the dream. I must have been 9. In it, I walked down a dark spiral staircase made of black stone. The deeper I went, the colder it became. At the bottom was a golden throne, and on that throne, something enormous, something primal, something so vivid and anatomical that I won't describe it here, for fear you'll wake up just to file a complaint. I told my father. He frowned and suggested I go outside more. I told my mother. She nodded and said, "Ah, the old god returns," then offered me tea. I said no. I was afraid the kettle would whisper. That dream never left me. Even now it lingers, humming somewhere near the edge of sleep. The shadow brings it up every now and then, usually when I start getting too comfortable with myself. That's her job, to poke me with things I thought I'd buried. She's very committed. But before we go deeper into all that, before we get to Freud, the visions, the mandalas, and the moments of beautiful, terrifying clarity, I think we need to revisit that boy properly. The quiet one, the one who listened too much, the one who asked the wrong questions in class, the one who thought maybe, just maybe, the armchair in the hallway was trying to give him moral advice. So let's return to that house. The one with the ticking clocks, the whispering ceilings, and a boy sitting very still, trying to understand why no one else could hear what the walls were saying. A boy with too many questions, and most of them were aimed at furniture. Holy archetype, I thought you'd be dreaming by now. But since we're both up, come closer. My shadow says this part's important. She even cleaned her edges for the occasion. She smells faintly of old libraries and lavender. I was born between two worlds, not in the dramatic, mythological sense, although I did once dream I was born during an eclipse inside a library. But no, just between my father's world and my mother's. My father was a pastor, straight-backed, verse-speaking, emotionally efficient. He believed in God like one believes in punctuality, firmly, quietly, without fuss. My mother, on the other hand, was more porous, the kind of woman who could hear a tea kettle and wonder if it was weeping. She believed in spirits, in dreams, in symbols. Most nights, she would retreat into silence or emerge from it with a sentence like, "The spirits are bored again." Nobody knew what that meant, except maybe the cat. Their marriage was, let's say, cosmically mismatched. And I was the bridge, a small boy tiptoeing between thunderous faith and whispering visions. We lived in a creaky house in Basel, where even the furniture had opinions. The wardrobe in the hallway judged my socks. The clock above the staircase sighed every time I asked about death. Once, I spent 20 minutes asking the kitchen table why it never answered me. My mother encouraged me. My father recommended carpentry. But I couldn't help it. Objects vibrated. Shadows blinked. Dreams scratched at the edges of the day. Then came the dream. I was about 10. The kind of age where boys normally dream of dragons or becoming a steam engine. But I dreamed of a descent. I stood before a tall, unfamiliar church. A tower, looming. It felt sacred, but not in the way my father's sermons did. Sacred like thunder. Sacred like silence. Inside, a staircase spiraled downward, deep into the earth. I followed it. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if my soul was descending more than my feet. At the bottom, a great wooden door. I opened it. Behind it, a stone chamber, empty, vast, humming with presence. And at the center, a monument, towering, smooth, dark, unmoving. I stared at it, confused. And then I knew, with the kind of knowing that doesn't come from books, that this thing was a phallus, enormous, symbolic, sacred, not obscene, not even biological, but archetypal. It radiated meaning, not sexual meaning, not yet, but something older, something primal. I was not frightened, but I knew with every fiber of my tiny self that I was not supposed to be there, that this vision had entered me too soon. A hush fell over the dream, the kind of hush that feels like stone pressing on your chest. I woke up, breathless, heart pounding, ashamed, though no one had shamed me. I hadn't even understood what I'd seen, but I had felt its power and its secrecy, and I knew, without anyone telling me, that I had crossed into something forbidden, not sinful, just sacred, unprepared. That was the moment, not the image, but the silence around it, that became my first real initiation into the mysteries of the unconscious. I didn't tell my father. I didn't tell my mother. I didn't tell the wardrobe. I found a notebook, brown leather, worn corners, and I wrote. It became the first entry in what I would later call my absurd dream journal, a collection of dream fragments too strange to explain and too important to forget. Rooms that folded inward, talking wolves that quoted Spinoza. Tuesday, I was a duck. Wednesday, I was a spoon. Thursday, I argued with time about etiquette. I didn't analyze. I wasn't a psychoanalyst yet. I just knew these dreams weren't nonsense. They were messages, wearing masks. And after that dream, the one with the spiral and the stone phallus, I began to sense something new. A presence, a double, watching me, quietly, from the corner of my thoughts. I called him number 2. Not my most poetic moment, but I was 10 and still recovering from being symbolically baptized by a sacred phallus. Number 2 was older than me, calmer. He didn't blink when the dreams got strange. He took notes. He stood inside me, behind me, above me. I couldn't tell. When I felt shame, he felt curiosity. When I felt awe, he seemed to nod. He was not a god, not a guide, just the rest of me, the invisible half. Years later, I would call him the shadow. But back then, he was the part of me that wasn't afraid of symbols, that whispered, "This means something. You don't need to know what yet." Still with me? Good. My cat Anima just returned from whatever archetypal plane she visited. She knocked over my valerian tea. That usually means the next dream is going to be weird or involve fish. But before we get lost in feathers and mandalas, I need you to understand something. That dream, that spiral, that descent, that sacred presence, it changed me. Not because of what it showed, but because of what it withheld. The way it said, "This is too soon." The way my own psyche placed a veil over the truth, not out of cruelty, but out of respect. That, dear listener, is the first lesson of the unconscious. It reveals only when you're ready. And sometimes, readiness takes a lifetime. I've spent decades circling that moment, dreaming back toward it, writing around it, watching it echo through symbols, patience, synchronicities. That descent wasn't just a dream. It was an initiation into mystery, into psyche, into meaning that can't be spoken. So naturally after that, I went looking for more, and I found it in the most dangerous place imaginable, a library, but we'll get to that next. Unless, of course, you've finally fallen asleep, in which case, sweet dreams, symbol chaser, your shadow never sleeps. Still with me? Oh dear. I was hoping the mention of a glowing phallus in a stone basement would have knocked you out. But since your psyche is still awake, let's keep walking. Careful though. This next part gets foggy, or as I like to say, symbol heavy with a chance of existential drizzle. After that dream, something shifted. I no longer looked at reality with a child's eyes. I looked at it the way you look at a mirror when it suddenly fogs up, knowing something's behind it, but unable to wipe it clear. I'd catch glimpses, outlines in the steam, shadows in the mist, truths that danced just out of reach. Reality felt like a riddle disguised as furniture. The objects remained, but they whispered at night. Basel, where I grew up, wasn't exactly the capital of cosmic insight, but it did have one powerful portal, the city library. It was old, cold, and smelled like the dust of forgotten ideas. The ceilings were high, the windows narrow, the silence deep, and I loved it. I found my hiding spot between rows W and Z, near the theology section, where no one else ventured unless they were professionally confused. That's where I first met the ancient ones, not in dreams, but in words. Gilgamesh, Isis, Orpheus, Dionysus, all sitting silently in rows, waiting to be remembered. I devoured their myths the way some children devour candy, except my sweets came with footnotes. I still remember the thrill of reading the Epic of Gilgamesh and realizing that someone had asked, thousands of years ago, the exact same questions that kept me awake at night. Who are we? What does death mean? Where is the edge of the world? And can you bring snacks? I was supposed to be studying Latin. Instead, I read about resurrection cults and solar gods. One afternoon, I found a book that claimed the Virgin Mary had taken over the role of ancient mother goddesses, and I almost dropped it in awe. This wasn't blasphemy, it was decoding. Mythology, it seemed, wasn't dead. It had just changed outfits. And I started to wonder, what else was hiding in plain sight? I began seeing connections everywhere, symbols in stained glass, hidden geometries in the cathedral floor. The spiral patterns of ferns reminded me of Ouroboroi. My teacher said I was intellectually erratic. I took it as a compliment. Also, small confession, I believed, with full sincerity, that the Book of Revelation was a bedtime story. Spoiler alert, it's not. Unless you find beasts with 7 heads comforting. I did, in a weird way. The more I read, the more I suspected that reality had layers. My classmates learned grammar. I searched for meaning. I wasn't better, just haunted. Haunted by voices from the past and symbols that refused to stay on the page. I wasn't trying to be strange. I just was. My thoughts felt older than I was, like I had borrowed a consciousness with too many past lives and not enough sleep. And the dreams, oh, the dreams kept coming. I didn't understand their language yet, but I knew they weren't just mental leftovers. They were invitations, postcards from the underworld. I kept a notebook under my pillow and scribbled whatever I remembered before the sunlight scared it away. Some nights it was just one word. Other nights, entire maps. One dream in particular came just weeks after the basement phallus. I was in church. My father stood at the pulpit, but the altar was Strange. Instead of a cross, there was a massive golden symbol, radiant and obscene, a radiant phallus, rising from the earth like a divine pillar. It pulsed with light, not vulgar, not crude, but terrifying in its sacredness, the kind of image that burns into your soul like a forgotten prophecy. Everyone in the pews bowed their heads, except me. I stared. I felt two things, awe and shame. The same whisper returned. You're not supposed to see this. And then, but you already have. I woke drenched in sweat, and I knew this wasn't just about the body. This was about power, creation, spirit in form. I didn't write this one in my dream journal. I drew it. Badly. It looked like a torch having an identity crisis, but I understood what it meant. The sacred hides in the unspeakable. Years later, I'd recognize these dreams for what they were. Eruptions of the archetypal realm. Symbols rising from the unconscious. But back then, I thought I was just strange, or cursed, or secretly ancient. My family thought I had the flu. I told them I was becoming mythologically literate. They nodded slowly and passed me more tea. Books became my refuge. I remember discovering Goethe and feeling like someone had cracked open my spine and taken notes. I underlined every mention of spirit, of myth, of the eternal feminine. I didn't know what it meant, only that it mattered. Goethe wasn't just a poet. He was an alchemist with better prose. Reading him felt like being invited into a club of silent initiates, all of whom had stared into the same symbolic abyss. At school, I began to drift. Not outwardly, I still recited Cicero when asked, but inwardly, I was gone, walking mental labyrinths, replaying dreams, trying to remember what the tower smelled like, what the phallus meant, what the symbols were whispering. Every day felt like a scavenger hunt designed by Hermes himself. I had no one to talk to. My mother had her spirits. My father had his verses. I had a growing suspicion that something inside me was building a map. I just didn't know where it led. One day, I skipped class and wandered into the back section of the library. There I found a book on alchemy. Its spine cracked like a secret. Inside, symbols I had seen in dreams. Snakes devouring themselves, suns inside coffins, kings in flames. My hand trembled. It wasn't just a book. It was recognition, a reunion with something I hadn't known I'd lost. I read until the sun went down. Then I walked home, stunned, as if I had been kissed by a ghost. I didn't even notice the cold. I felt warm with meaning. The dreams that followed were more intense. I saw a temple of mirrors, each reflecting a different version of myself. I dreamt of a woman with a lion's tail who told me I was late to my own destiny. I woke up and apologized, and wrote her a letter, still waiting for a reply. By this point, my shadow, my silent twin, number 2, had become more vocal. He didn't speak in words, but in urges. Read this. Avoid that. Look closer. Wait. He once made me stare at a single line from a book for 20 minutes. It read, "The gods have not died. They've gone underground." That was it. That was the moment my soul got its library card. Permanent member. No expiration date. Still with me? The cat's asleep now, her tail twitching in Jungian spirals. I take that as a sign of approval. You see, it was never about the books, or the dreams, or even the glowing phallus in the dark. It was about the invitation to go deeper, to listen, to lose the map and trust the myth. And just when I thought I'd found my guide, a new voice entered the scene, cigar in hand, eyes like lightning. A father figure, soaked in theory and tobacco. Yes, him, Freud. It began with a book, a thick, dusty, scandalously intelligent book. The Interpretation of Dreams by Sigmund Freud. I read it under the covers with a candle and a magnifying glass, like it was heresy. And in a way, it was heresy against silence, against repression, against polite Swiss ignorance. Every page felt like an excavation. Sex, death, childhood, parental figures turning into monsters or metaphors. It was like reading a secret manual for my own unconscious, or at least the part of it shaped like Vienna and vaguely hostile to mothers. Freud was a revelation, a rebel priest of the mind. I remember thinking, here is a man who dares to translate dreams into science. I didn't know you were allowed to do that. Up until then, dreams were like weather, strange, inevitable, and discussed only when convenient. But Freud, he mapped them like ancient ruins. He made the unconscious feel like Rome, powerful, architectural, and slightly decadent. I was hooked. I wrote him a letter. I didn't expect an answer, but he replied. A long, dense, fatherly reply. And just like that, something in me snapped into place. I had a mentor, an intellectual father, one with a cigar. And not just metaphorically. He smoked a lot. His thoughts smelled like tobacco and authority. When I finally met him in person, it was like encountering a living archetype. Freud had this gravity. He didn't walk. He entered. He spoke in fully formed paragraphs, each sentence heavy with meaning and the faint smell of psychoanalysis. I was in awe. We talked for 13 hours straight. I didn't eat. I barely drank. I just listened and spoke and listened again. Something inside me, number two, my symbolic twin, whispered, "Careful, he's watching your soul." But I ignored it. For once, I wanted to be seen, fully, intellectually, metaphysically. Cigar ally. Freud welcomed me like a son. He called me the crown prince of psychoanalysis. I laughed when he said it, then immediately journaled the moment in calligraphy. His mind was razor sharp. He could cut through your childhood in 3 questions. But more than that, he was courageous. He went where others wouldn't, into the primal, the taboo, the slippery places of shame. Still, even in those early days, I felt an itch. There were things I saw in dreams, temples, serpents, mothers who turned into cosmic rivers, that didn't quite fit into his diagrams. When I mentioned symbols that weren't obviously sexual, he looked at me like I'd misplaced my instincts. "The phallus, Carl," he would say. "It's always the phallus." And sure, sometimes it was. But what about the luminous fish? What about the mother goddess wearing 7 masks? What about the staircase that spiraled not down into repression, but up into vision? Freud didn't like up. He liked deep. And I liked both. Still, I stayed loyal. We exchanged dozens of letters, sometimes daily. We debated symbols like 2 philosophers with insomnia. I once dreamed we were both trapped in a library that kept rearranging itself. When I told him, he simply replied, "You are anxious about the structure of our theory." He was probably right, but part of me also wondered, was that all it meant? One night, after a long exchange about dream content versus latent content, I looked at his latest letter and saw something strange. It wasn't the words. It was the space between the words. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like something was missing. Not a thought, but a dimension. That's when my dreams began to rebel. I saw Freud in my sleep, standing at the gates of a symbolic city, refusing to enter. Behind him, a tower rose, shaped like a spiral. He shook his head. "There's no data there," he said. I begged him to look, but he turned away. The tower began to hum. I woke up sweating. Again. Still, I didn't confront him. Not yet. I wasn't ready to break the spell, because that's what it was. A spell. Freud had awakened something in me. A hunger for meaning. A thirst for order in the chaos. But now the chaos had started singing. And it didn't speak Viennese. I remember lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, my cat Anima purring like an ancient deity. My shadow stirred. "He doesn't see what you see," it whispered. "You need to go further." "But he's Freud," I whispered back. "Exactly. Still awake? You're a brave soul, or just deeply curious. Either way, good, because next, I dream in letters, and Freud begins to haunt the margins." Still here? My Anima is impressed. She just blinked twice and knocked over my incense. That's Jungian approval, trust me. It began with ink. Not dreams, not visions, but ink. Thick black letters dancing across ivory pages like symbols waiting to wake up. Freud and I wrote to each other obsessively, sometimes twice a day. Each envelope felt like a seance, not of the dead, but of the unconscious, our unconscious. I remember holding his first letter like a relic. His handwriting was precise, almost surgical, the kind of script that looked like it had already diagnosed you. I read it 12 times. Then I read it aloud. Then I dreamt of it. The words floated in my sleep, rearranging themselves, spelling out secrets in languages I didn't know I knew. And so began a correspondence that felt more like an initiation. Freud was everything I needed at that moment. Brilliant, paternal, fiercely rational. He called me the crown prince of psychoanalysis. I pretended to laugh. Inside, I built a throne. Our letters were volcanic. We debated dreams, instincts, traumas. We sliced through symptoms like surgeons, delighted in our own discoveries. It was intoxicating. I wasn't just learning, I was becoming. But as I grew, so did something else. A whisper. A weight. A presence in the corner of my psyche that didn't fully agree. Let's call it the beginning of rebellion. Or more precisely, a craving for something Freud didn't name. At first I kept it to myself. I wanted to protect the relationship. After all, he was Freud. He had theories like cathedrals and cigars like oracles. Who was I to challenge him? So when I had a dream about a radiant fish swimming in a circle of fire, I hesitated. I wrote it down. I even drafted a letter to Freud about it. But I never sent it. Why? Because I knew what he'd say. Libido, phallic symbol, repressed aquatic desire, something clever, something accurate perhaps, but not enough. Another time I dreamt I was in a temple filled with birds made of glass. One of them spoke in my mother's voice. Don't forget the mountain. Again I wrote it down. Again I didn't share it. I feared that once interpreted through Freud's lens, it would lose its soul. Meanwhile, the letters kept coming. Freud was tireless, elegant, dominant. He mapped the psyche with confidence. But I started to notice the limits. His interpretations always trace back to the same territory. Childhood, sexuality, repression. Important territory, yes. But what about the rest? What about meaning? Mystery? Myth? The itch grew louder. Then came the dream that changed everything. I was in a vast room, no ceiling, no walls, only sky. Freud stood beside me, flipping through a giant book made of mirrors. Every time he turned a page, a voice echoed, "Not this. Try again." I looked over and saw that the book reflected only his own image, over and over. He smiled. I didn't. When I woke up, I knew. My unconscious was staging a coup. I began dreaming in letters, literal ones. The alphabet became terrain. I walked on vowels. I climbed mountains shaped like consonants. My favorite dream involved a ravine shaped like a question mark, with Freud shouting across it, "Return to the phallus." I shouted back, "What if the phallus is a metaphor for something that isn't the phallus?" The echo laughed. I still wrote to him, of course, but something had changed. I was no longer writing for him. I was writing for the space between us, for what he didn't see. That's when the word first came to me. Not in a dream, but in a flash of intuition, while staring at a mandala-shaped tea stain on my desk. Archetype. I didn't know exactly what it meant yet, but it felt ancient, rooted, like a key buried in collective soil. Not personal, not sexual, not even rational, just deep. Freud didn't like deep unless it was dark and Freudian. And so I began to study in secret, old texts, alchemy, mythology, Indian philosophy. I didn't abandon Freud, I expanded him. But expansion looks like heresy to someone guarding a temple. I dreamt again. This time Freud was inside a clock tower, winding its gears. Every tick was a diagnosis, every tock a cigar puff. I watched from below as the tower bent, not broke, just bent, into a spiral. My spiral. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire, holding one of his letters. It was full of brilliance, but it was flat, two-dimensional, like a map of a world that no longer felt big enough for my psyche. And somewhere between the fourth and fifth reading, I heard her, the shadow. "Too many cigars," she said, yawning. "Not enough cosmos." I laughed out loud. Then I cried. Then I wrote a letter to myself, beginning with, "You are not lost. You are just outside Vienna. Still listening? Then maybe you're ready. Because next, the clock breaks, the throne cracks, and I finally step into the temple alone, with no father and a lot more symbols." Freud slammed the psychic door. My dreams echoed for weeks. It wasn't loud, no shouting, just absence, the kind that rings. I remember holding his last letter. It wasn't angry, just final, like he'd shut a book and put it back on a shelf marked "Too mystical, do not touch." I read it in the quietest room of my house. Even the clock seemed hesitant to tick, and when it did, it felt like mockery. I wrote him back, a long letter, 18 pages. I poured everything into it, symbols, dreams, apologies, questions, mandalas drawn in the margins. I read it twice, signed it with a trembling Carl, and placed it in an envelope. Then I didn't send it. I placed it on the fire instead, watched it curl, blacken, and vanish, like a bridge eaten by shadow. That was the night I stopped being someone's student. But it wasn't clean. Nothing transformative ever is. The very next evening, I dreamed of Freud sitting calmly on the back of a dragon. The creature shifted restlessly beneath him, wings twitching, eyes glowing with ancient hunger. "Fly," I told him. The sky is real. Freud frowned and replied, "This is irrational." Then he climbed down. I screamed, not in the dream, but in the sheets. The next morning, I couldn't eat. My hands trembled. Number 2, my longtime inner twin, looked at me with strange pity. "You've seen too many towers," he said softly, "to stay in a cellar." I knew then that he, the shadow, the rebel, the poet, was no longer number 2. He was me. I was him. Integration isn't a handshake. It's a quiet takeover. Later that week, I ran a bath. Don't laugh. It was the only place I could think without being overheard by my own symbols. I lay there, hot water rising, arms floating like failed wings. I thought of every room I'd ever shared with Freud, every step I'd taken trying to be the perfect heir. And I wept. Not because I was weak, but because I'd lost a father I'd never truly had. In the water I saw it, a serpent curled around an egg. Not Freud's serpent, not libido, something older, something that watched the cosmos spin and decided to stay quiet. The egg pulsed. The serpent didn't bite. It protected. That night, I wrote again. Not to Freud, to myself, to the future. I wrote about symbols, about archetypes, about images that don't belong to individuals but to everyone. I drew spirals, circles, sacred geometry that didn't care what my profession was. I wrote the word mandala without fully knowing what it meant, but feeling for the first time that I didn't need permission to explore it. I called it the collective unconscious. The term felt dangerous, like smuggling fire into a lecture hall. But I didn't care. I no longer wanted approval. I wanted truth. And the truth was not always parent-friendly. Days passed, then weeks. No more letters came. No more cigars in envelopes. No more paternal metaphors disguised as advice. I walked through Zurich like a ghost, not sad but emptied. I saw snowflakes fall on statues and thought, everything is a symbol now. I was alone, but I was finally mine. And the symbols didn't stop. I dreamed of flame-haired goddesses laughing in underground libraries. I saw ancient faces in puddles. A tree in my garden dropped a single leaf, and I wrote 3 pages about it. I didn't analyze anymore. I listened. The world had become mythic, alive. I wasn't interpreting dreams. I was dreaming while awake. One afternoon, while sorting through old books, I found a text on Hindu cosmology. I opened it. Halfway through a verse about Shiva, I burst into tears, not from comprehension, from recognition. "I knew this before I was born," I whispered. It wasn't nostalgia. It was ancestral memory, echoes in my bones, proof that my soul was older than my CV. I started wearing stranger clothes, speaking slower. People in town whispered. My colleagues looked concerned. I smiled more. That worried them most. And then, the dream that sealed it. I was in a cave, deep, wet stone. The walls pulsed like lungs. Ahead of me, a figure stood, tall, unmoving. Freud. His back turned. I called out. No answer. I walked closer. Still no movement. I reached out, but I stopped. Something in me understood. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a departure. I turned away, walked deeper into the cave, alone. And behind me, the figure of Freud began to fade. Not from my memory, but from my need. Because some dreams aren't meant to be interpreted. They're meant to be followed. And I was just getting started. Still here? Oh dear. I hoped your shadow would be doing the listening by now. But since we're both wide awake, symbolically of course, let's take a little walk into the woods, literally. After the rupture with Freud, my psyche demanded silence, not just metaphorical silence, the real kind, the kind that echoes. So I built a cabin by Lake Zurich in Bollingen. No phone, no lectures, just me, the mist, and a teapot that whistled more wisely than most professors. It was a small, octagonal tower made of stone, no ornament, just structure, solid, enduring, a mandala in architectural form. And yes, I did speak to the stones. Some of them had excellent advice. I think it was granite. By day, I chopped wood. By night, I chopped illusions. The first winter, I barely slept. The dreams were endless. They came in waves like old myths trying to get my attention. A one-eyed bear playing chess. A spiral staircase made of feathers. My childhood cat reading the Upanishads. I didn't write them down. Not yet. I just watched. Listened. Like a tourist in my own unconscious. Anima, my black cat, an eternal mystery, followed me everywhere. She rarely meowed. She just stared. Especially at the corner where I kept the mandalas I hadn't dared draw yet. I suspected on several occasions that she was judging me. One morning, after a particularly vivid dream of a sunken temple guarded by a blind harpist, I took out a compass and walked straight into the woods. No destination, just direction. The trees didn't speak, but they didn't need to. I walked until the silence was thick enough to lean on. That's when I found it. A perfect circle of moss, undisturbed, glowing slightly in the shade. I sat down, cross-legged, like a confused monk, and I whispered, "What now?" A pine cone fell on my head. The forest has a sense of humor. Archetypal, yes, but playful. I took it as a sign. That evening, back in the cabin, I boiled some herbs. A tisane I invented, allegedly for sleep, though it mostly induced symbolic visions and mild existential crises. Then I sat at my desk, opened a blank page, and began to draw. Circles, patterns, symbols I didn't recognize but which felt familiar. Spirals that hummed softly when I traced them. It wasn't art. It was listening. I called them mandalas. Each one felt like a small revelation. Not a conclusion, never that. Just a window, a whisper, a small mirror into something deeper than memory. I drew one every day, sometimes in silence, sometimes while anima knocked over my ink pot with what I can only assume was deliberate archetypal sabotage. And then, one day, I spoke to a rock, aloud. I told it about a dream, a recurring one, where I built a tower in the middle of a desert made of time. The rock didn't answer, but somehow I felt understood. Bollingen changed me, or perhaps it undid me. I stopped trying to make sense of everything. I let the irrational in. I drank from a cup without knowing if it was tea or metaphor. I kissed a tree once, for science. The solitude wasn't always gentle. Some nights the dreams were so loud I had to sleep sitting up. Once I dreamed that my own shadow tried to eat me. I woke up to find anima sleeping on my chest. Coincidence? Unlikely. In Bollingen, I learned that you don't chase the soul. You wait, you offer tea, you make a fire, and then, maybe, it shows up, wearing a dream and smelling faintly of lavender and lightning. It was there, in that silence, that I first sensed it. Something vast, ancient. Not Freud's unconscious, too domestic, too tidy. Something collective, cosmic, like the memory of the world whispering through the cracks in my walls. And so I stayed until the dreams began to speak in circles, until the symbols asked to be painted, until the serpent returned, this time with questions of its own. But those I'll save for tomorrow's fire. Unless, of course, you're still awake. Then let's keep going. Into the mandalas, into the whispers, into the very center of the self, where the next story is already dreaming of you. Still awake? Either your psyche is unusually caffeinated, or your inner child has decided that tonight is not the night for sleep. Either way, you're here. So am I. And so is the mandala. You see, after Bollingen, I began to draw one circle every day. Not because I was bored, because I had to. As if my hand was guided by something older than thought. I'd sit at my desk, candles flickering, anima curled up like a black sphinx on the windowsill, and I'd wait. Then, the shape would come. Spirals, crosses, flowers inside flames, suns nested in darkness. None of it was planned. All of it made sense. To a part of me I hadn't met yet. Mandala, the sacred circle, the symbol of totality, a mirror for the soul with a geometry only dreams understand. I wasn't drawing art. I was charting my own psyche. And sometimes I messed it up. Once I dropped soup on a freshly drawn diagram of the self. I tried to salvage it. The mandala forgave me. The soup did not. Another time, I drew the same shape 3 days in a row without realizing. My shadow whispered, "You're stuck, Carl." I blamed the cat. Anima blinked. Not guilty, apparently. Each drawing felt like a whispered message from the unconscious. Here, this is who you are, or who you were, or who you might become. I didn't always understand, but I felt something shifting, as if the act of tracing circles was slowly aligning something deep inside me. Like a compass, finally remembering where north is. I'd begun to notice a pattern. The more I surrendered, the clearer the images became. Less ego, more echo. Less theory, more presence. I wasn't thinking anymore. I was listening. To dreams, to symbols, to colors, even to mistakes. I once spilled ink and it made the perfect serpent. That was unsettling. And here's the thing. The mandala isn't just a picture. It's a place. A psychic temple where contradictions meet and shake hands. Light and shadow. Masculine and feminine. The wound and the healer. All of them dancing in a circle that says, "You're allowed to be whole." Some evenings, I'd finish a drawing and cry. Not from sadness, from recognition. I'd seen a piece of myself I didn't know I was missing. Other nights, I'd fall asleep mid-sketch, dreaming I was inside the diagram itself, walking the spiral path toward the center, toward whatever waited there. Probably another version of me holding tea and looking confused. I never showed those drawings to Freud. He would have called them neurotic projections of unresolved complexes. Maybe he was right. Maybe he was also missing the point. Because something in me had begun to trust the image more than the theory, the page more than the prescription. And so I drew. Every day. Sometimes badly. Sometimes beautifully. Always sincerely. It became my form of meditation, prayer, diagnosis, and dance. Each mandala a conversation. Each circle a doorway. And once that doorway opened, something else came through. Something red. Something ancient. The book was waiting, and it was no ordinary book. I had the strangest dream last night. I was sitting at my desk, but the ink flowed upward, the paper whispered back. And when I blinked, my pen had grown scales, not metaphorically, full reptilian elegance. That's when I knew it was time to start the Red Book. Not a diary, not a theory, a descent. It began, as most strange adventures do, with silence. I sat in my study, candle flickering, the night hanging heavy over Zurich, and I let go, not like a patient releasing trauma, like a man opening the cellar door to his own psyche. I allowed images to come, figures, scenes, symbols. They emerged uninvited, like old friends with new faces, some gentle, some terrifying, all real, in the way dreams are real when you wake up still tasting their perfume. I met a man with the beard of an alchemist and the eyes of a disappointed librarian. He didn't speak. He merely rearranged stars. Then came the warrior with no helmet, blindfolded, who insisted on dueling me with invisible swords. And of course, the serpent. Ah, yes, the talking serpent. He wore a feathered hat, not stylish, ceremonial. I asked him what he represented. He laughed. Representation is for the waking. I am for the weaving. Then he slithered into a spiral and vanished into a book that hadn't been written yet. Some people keep diaries. Others post tweets. I conjured reptiles in symbolic headwear. And it didn't feel like madness. It felt honest, like the soul, unedited. Still with me? Good, because this part gets serpentine. Each evening I returned, not always willingly, but the Red Book demanded attention. I painted mandalas until my hand cramped. I heard whispers in old Latin. I drank so much chamomile that my dreams smelled floral. These weren't hallucinations. These were dialogues between me and the deepest currents beneath my waking thoughts. I once asked the serpent, "What do you want from me?" He blinked horizontally, which was upsetting, and said, "To be heard, to be felt, to be drawn in crimson ink." So I drew and wrote and watched myself disappear into symbols. An old man offered me a key. A child swallowed it. A tower crumbled. A phoenix emerged. Typical Wednesday. I started losing track of days. My wife would ask how my work was going, and I'd say, "Which one? The external or the eternal?" She stopped asking. My shadow grew louder. Not in voice, in presence. I could feel it judging my dreams, taking notes, pacing. One night, I spilled soup on a cosmic diagram. The soup never recovered. That's when I knew the boundaries between me and my imagination had fully dissolved. And honestly, it was a relief. Waking life is so aggressively literal. Here, in this space, I could be sincere through absurdity. In one particularly vivid trance, I stood at the edge of a frozen lake. Beneath the ice, memories swam. Childhood, fear, church bells, Freud's disapproving eyebrow. The serpent emerged from a crack in the surface and asked, "Do you still think this is about you?" I didn't answer. I knelt. I listened. And now, silence. My pen has stopped. The serpent with the feathered hat vanishes in the folds of the dream. The warrior lays down his invisible sword. The old sage turns his back, whispering something I won't understand for another decade. But something's changed. I feel it in the corners of the room, in the way my shadow sits beside me, straighter than before, almost smug, as if it's been waiting for this moment, as if it's about to say something. Still with me? Oh dear. I hoped your shadow would be doing the listening by now. But since it's not, I suppose it's time we talked about it. about the part of you that watches in the dark, about the side of me that disagrees. Let's give the shadow a voice, shall we? Still with me? Oh dear, I was hoping your dreams had carried you off by now. But if you're still here, then I suppose it's time I confessed. My shadow talks a lot, and not always kindly. It started subtly. At first, it was just a feeling, like someone was rolling their eyes in the background of my thoughts. A faint sigh when I misinterpreted a dream. A sarcastic cough when I wrote something overly poetic in the red book. Then one night, while drawing yet another mandala, this one shaped like a spiral staircase inside a snail, I heard it clearly. Really, Carl? Again with the spiral metaphors? My hand froze. I looked around. No one. Just the usual silence of my study, broken only by the ticking of the Jungian clock of cosmic irony. You see, most people think the shadow is scary, a monster under the bed. But mine is a snarky roommate with impeccable timing and no filter. I called him numero deux for a long time. Now he insists I just call him Shadow capital S, like Beyoncé. He's that confident. He critiques everything. My dreams, my theories, my socks. Too symbolic, he'll say, pointing at a perfectly ordinary pair. Try beige, Carl. Beige doesn't scream unresolved father issues. And don't get him started on my tower building phase at Bollingen. Ooh, look at me, I'm stacking rocks. Such depth, such gravitas, he mocked one morning. To which I replied, as dignified as one can be while sipping lukewarm Valerian tea. They're archetypal structures, thank you very much. He wasn't impressed. He never is. But in truth, he helped. My shadow, for all his sass and unsolicited commentary, kept me honest. He reminded me that even the great explorers of the unconscious need someone to say, that dream about the talking fish in the library might just be about dinner. He grounded me in his own shadowy way, not by dimming the light, but by reminding me that the light is meaningless without contrast. We had arguments, of course, epic ones, existential wrestling matches at 3 a.m. One night, I insisted a dream about a giant cheese wheel rolling downhill represented the collective ego dissolving under cosmic pressure. He countered, or maybe you're just lactose intolerant and had fondue too late. I threw a pillow at him. He threw back a quote from Nietzsche. He loved Nietzsche. I think he saw himself in him, moody, brilliant, probably allergic to chamomile. He'd quote, "Thus spoke Zarathustra," while I was brushing my teeth, just to sound profound. One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star. And then he'd add, "But you, Carl, you're more into lukewarm stars doing yoga." Yet, slowly, I began to listen more closely, not just to the sarcasm, but to the wisdom beneath. The shadow isn't evil. It's just everything you've forgotten, rejected, ignored. Your childhood tears, your envy, your secret cravings, the part of you that wanted to dance and never dared, the part of you that still dreams in crayons. I started teaching this gently, to my patients, in lectures. I told them, your shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to be seen. It's the inner child with muddy shoes, knocking at the door long after bedtime. And if you keep locking it out one day, it will break the windows. You're getting sentimental, Shadow said once, noticing my softened tone during a lecture. You used to be cool, Carl. I shrugged. Maybe I did grow softer, but also deeper, more whole, less obsessed with perfection, more fascinated by contradiction. One night, I tried to silence him. I meditated, burned some sage, drew a perfect mandala, and sat in front of it like a monk, waiting for enlightenment. Silence. For a moment, I thought I had succeeded. Then a whisper. Nice symmetry, Carl. But maybe you just need a nap. He was right. I've learned that you don't defeat the shadow. You dance with it. You let it whisper, scold, joke, cry. And then you offer it a cup of tea. Not to tame it, but to hear what it's been aching to say since childhood. And sometimes, when the teacup is empty and the fire's gone out, my shadow simply murmurs, "Thank you." Those moments are rare, but they matter. Do you have a shadow too? Maybe it's the part of you that cringes when you're praised, or the voice that says, "Don't try, you'll fail," or the one that rolls its eyes when you try to love yourself. That's not your enemy. That's your forgotten twin trying to come home. I don't always like mine, but I trust him, because when he's silent, that's when I worry. And now, as I lie in bed, yes, the one with the embroidered mandalas and suspiciously chatty owl, I hear him again. Just a low murmur tonight. He says, "Tell them about the dreams." I nod. Of course, the dreams. Because you see, in dreams, symbols speak. But sometimes they do more than speak. Sometimes they dance, flash, burn, melt, and vanish. And sometimes they text you in emoji. Yes, that's what I'm beginning to realize. But we'll get there. Close your eyes and follow the flaming fish. Since your eyes are still symbolically open, allow me to share something that might sound odd, even for me. I once dreamt of a flaming fish inside a library. It winked at me, turned into a grandmother clock, and exploded into feathers. Yes, that happened. And no, I hadn't eaten cheese. Now Freud, of course, would have had a field day. Repressed piscine desire, he'd say, waving a cigar like a wand. But me? I stared at that dream for 3 days. I drew it in 6 colors, described it in my journal, even sculpted it out of mashed potatoes once during an unfortunate lunch. And after all that, I wrote, "This dream feels like guilt, wonder, and a mild case of repressed joy, in that order." Because here's the truth, my friend. Dreams do not speak in words. They speak in symbols, in gestures, in half faces and sideways staircases, in whispers and shadows. And yes, sometimes, in something very much like emojis. Not the kind you send your cousin, the kind your soul sends when it's too tired for language. A star falling into a well? That's not astronomy. That's grief. A laughing fox on a bicycle. Mischief, obviously. And also Tuesday. I used to tell my patients this. Stop asking what it means. Ask how it moves you. Meaning is for the ego. Movement is for the soul. Let me tell you about Herr K. He dreamt of a raven perched on a melting clock, whispering something he couldn't hear. He asked, "Is it death? Madness? Time slipping away?" I said, No. How did the raven feel? He paused. "Safe," he said, like an old friend. And that changed everything. Because sometimes the symbol is not the message. It's the door. My dream journals are full of such nonsense. Let me read you a few lines. Not to interpret, just to share. Night 57. I was a crab in a courtroom. Freud was the judge. My father was the prosecutor. I defended myself with soap bubbles. Verdict pending. Night 102, I walked barefoot on the roof of a cathedral made entirely of glass. Below me, a child was drawing mandalas in the sand. The child was me, and also a dachshund. Night 166, I married a mountain. Guests included a cloud, a snail in a tuxedo, and a violin that played itself. I woke up in tears, joy, or perhaps altitude sickness. Some people say this is nonsense, but nonsense is just truth in a costume. The dream doesn't ask to be solved. It asks to be felt, to be welcomed, to be drawn in bad crayon, to be whispered to while you stir your tea. This is why I drew mandalas. Not for symmetry, for sanity. Each dream was a whisper from the deep, a message in a bottle from the parts of me I hadn't met yet. Some were funny, some were terrifying, some were both, like the one where I was a candle and Freud kept trying to light me. When people came to me, tired, fractured, aching, they didn't need a translation. They needed a place to lay their dream down. They needed someone to say, "That flaming fish? Yes, I've met it. It's older than Rome." Sometimes I'd ask them to paint it. Sometimes we'd sculpt it out of wax or mud or day-old bread. The material didn't matter. The image did. The truth is, dreams are not puzzles. They're stories, sacred ones, ridiculous ones, ones with pink elephants doing ballet in your childhood kitchen. And yes, those too deserve respect. Do you know how many hours I spent just sitting with people's dreams? Not explaining, just listening, as if their dream were a poem written by the soul, and the only right response was silence. My shadow thinks I overdo it. That jellyfish in the church? Definitely indigestion, it told me last week. You need fewer herbs. But the shadow misses the point. As usual, symbols aren't recipes, they're mirrors. What you see in them depends on who you are when you look. Let me tell you how I learned that. A child came to see me once, small, serious, holding a picture she'd drawn in crayon. A house, no doors, no windows, just 4 solid walls. I asked, "What is this?" She said, "It's my dream. I live there, but I can't get out." I didn't ask her what it meant. I didn't say, "This represents the ego under siege." I didn't analyze. I sat beside her, quietly. Then I picked up a crayon and said, "Should we draw a door?" And we did, together. That's when I realized, sometimes the only interpretation a dream needs is company. Dreams are letters written by the unconscious and mailed to your waking self with no return address. You can analyze the handwriting, sure, but the real magic happens when you read the letter aloud, slowly, softly, and feel what it stirs inside. And if tonight you dream of a dancing pineapple holding your childhood diary, don't panic, don't dissect, don't search Google at 3 a.m. Just sit with it. Ask, "What do you want me to feel?" And then, maybe, draw it. And now, speaking of houses and dreams, let me tell you what happened with that child and what that dream became. Not a symbol, not a diagnosis, something stranger and much more healing. Still with me? What a surprise. I thought the dream of the pineapple was enough to send anyone straight into the collective unconscious. But since you're still here, Let me tell you what happened to the little girl, the one who dreamt of a house with no doors. She came to me without words. Her shoes were too big for her feet, or maybe her soul was too small for the world. Her eyes held something I recognized instantly. That silent ache only the psyche understands. No tantrums, no tears, just containment. She didn't want to talk. Children rarely do when the wound is older than they are. So we drew. Every session. Always the same house. Solid, silent, square. No doors, no windows, no escape. Until one day, I asked her, gently, like brushing dust from a mirror, "Shall we add something? Just a dot, maybe. A skylight. Or a cat." She looked at me, blinked twice, then picked up a red crayon and drew a small circle, right in the center of the wall. A porthole. It wasn't much, but it was everything. That day, I understood something. Healing is not loud. It's not a lightning strike. It's a circle of red wax on a paper house. A way to say, I see myself, and I might let the world see me too. People came to me for dreams, but they stayed for silence. Not the empty kind, the sacred kind. Silence is not absence, it's invitation. Sometimes we'd sit for 40 minutes without speaking. A patient would sketch a bird trapped in a jar, or a tree with no roots, and I'd say nothing. Because what is there to say, really, when a soul is speaking in chalk? Once a man told me his dream with shaking hands. I'm walking through a desert. My mouth is full of sand. I try to scream, but the sand turns into bees. He looked terrified, but I asked, what happened next? And he said, I woke up, and the buzzing didn't stop. I placed a small glass jar on the table, empty. He stared at it. Then, slowly, he placed his hand over it and whispered, I think the bees live here now. We never spoke of the dream again, but the buzzing quieted. That's the thing, you see. Healing doesn't always look like talking. It looks like finding a home for your bees. It looks like honoring the dream instead of dissecting it, making it tea, drawing it in the margins of your calendar, letting it sit beside you in bed. Because the psyche doesn't want to be solved. It wants to be accompanied. Even now, all these years later, I remember the smell of charcoal on paper, the hesitant way someone would draw their father as a lion, or their guilt as a leaking boat. I remember how sometimes a person would cry not from pain, but from recognition, as if their soul had finally been seen by someone other than a mirror. Do you know what the strangest part was? The healing didn't happen during the sessions. It happened after, in dreams, in long walks by the lake, in the quiet moment when a patient would tie their shoelaces slower than usual because something inside had changed and their hands were trying to understand. One woman, I'll call her L, dreamt of a mirror that showed only other people's faces. She was terrified of it. So we made one out of tin foil and string. She looked in, saw nothing. Then, slowly, the outline of her own face began to appear. I exist, she whispered. It was a Tuesday. The sun was quiet that day, and the room, just for a moment, felt like the inside of a womb. Sometimes my patients would leave me gifts, not out of gratitude, but because some part of them had grown and needed to share. A pebble from a beach in a dream, a feather that fell from nowhere, a mandala drawn in blueberry jam. I kept them all. You see, healing is not about getting better. It's about getting real, getting back to the image, the feeling, the crack in the wall that was always there but no one ever dared to name. I often say this. When someone tells you their dream, they are handing you a key. You don't need to use it. Just hold it and don't drop it. Because even the smallest dream can carry an entire lifetime. And the most wounded among us, they dream in riddles, in colors no one's ever named, in melodies only birds understand. But the moment you listen, truly listen, those melodies start to make sense. Not in the head, in the chest. And that is stranger healing. So if tonight you find yourself dreaming of locked doors, melting mirrors, or a fish wearing your grandmother's voice, don't panic. Sit with it, draw it, whisper back. You don't need to know what it means. You only need to stay in the room. Even now, I dream of that little girl's house. But the door is open, and the wind smells like crayons. Now let me show you something else. Something older than healing, older than dreams. A man sitting at his desk years later, aging Jung, gray-haired, still writing, still searching, leafing through his old journals, and asking himself the question we all ask, sooner or later. Shall we open that journal together? My word, either you're deeply invested in symbolic psychology, or your pillow is even more lost than my mandala from 1956. But since you're here, may I confess something? I once considered opening a bakery. Truly. There was a week, just one, where I thought, perhaps what the world needs is fewer books and more brioche. Something warm, tangible, yeasty. The kind of gift that doesn't need footnotes or dream interpretation. Just butter. But instead, I chose to spend decades deciphering fish dreams and owl metaphors. And don't get me wrong, it was magnificent. I bathed in symbols, dined on archetypes, danced with shadows. But sometimes, especially on cold Tuesday mornings when my knees ache and the sky looks like it's forgotten how to shine, I wonder what it would have been like to hand someone a croissant instead of a cosmic revelation. Now that I'm older, silver-haired, slower spoken, and slightly more agreeable, I often find myself rereading my old journals, dozens of them, some filled with dreams so rich they practically hum, others so obscure I suspect they were written by my unconscious while it was tipsy and on holiday. There's one entry, in particular, dated March 3rd, 1933. A single sentence. I met a goat named Regret. He offered me chewing gum. I declined. What was I thinking? No, truly, what was I thinking? That's the thing about dreams. At the time, they seem saturated with meaning, urgent, sacred. You wake up shaken, marked, certain that you've just encountered something ancient and necessary. But decades later, they look back at you with mischievous eyes and say, "Figure me out, old man." And so I try. I really do. But even with all my diagrams, my symbols, my careful annotations, some dreams remain as cryptic as a poem written in rain. Slippery, vanishing, beautiful, but untouchable. Sometimes I imagine an instruction manual, the care and feeding of one soul. Chapter 1. Do not panic when you dream of being swallowed by a grandmother-shaped cloud. Chapter 2. Always listen to the mice. They know. Chapter 3. Your shadow is just playing dead. Give it tea and wait. But there is no manual, no table of contents, no index of archetypes. There are only dreams, and silence, and tea that grows cold while you stare at the page, wondering if the apple in your dream meant knowledge, temptation, or just indigestion. I once dreamt I was sailing on a boat made entirely of mirrors. Every time I looked down, I saw different versions of myself. A child, a teacher, a weather vane. One version kept waving and shouting, "Wrong direction." I ignored him. He had terrible hair. But I think about him still. Was he right? Was he me? Am I always the weather vane, turning with forces I pretend to understand? You see, the more you chase clarity, the more it dances just out of reach, like trying to catch fog in a net or explain poetry to a toaster. And the truth is, maybe we're not meant to understand every dream. Maybe some are just visitors, bringing messages we're not ready to receive yet, or ever. Maybe their job isn't to be solved. Maybe their job is to make us sit still for once and listen, to stop interpreting and start feeling. I used to believe that time would make it clearer, that one day I'd look back and say, of course, the flaming hedgehog was my repressed ambition. But instead, what time brought was gentleness. I no longer demand answers from my dreams. I offer them cocoa and ask them how they've been. I let them come and go like strange guests at a lifelong masquerade. Some stay, some vanish, some leave glitter in my subconscious for weeks. Because what is clarity really? A straight line? A conclusion? A satisfying aha? Or just the quiet feeling that, even if you don't understand, you've been changed? I remember one night, not so long ago, I dreamt of an empty cathedral made entirely of honey. Bees moved through it like monks. There were no words, no figures, just light, amber light. And for the first time in years, I felt something melt in me. Not clarity, but peace. The younger me would have filled 10 pages analyzing it. The older me just wrote, sweetness, stillness, buzz. 3 words. That was enough. Because sometimes the dream doesn't need a sermon, just a sigh. There's wisdom in not knowing. There's dignity in mystery. Not everything must be explained, especially not the things that move your soul sideways. I think that's what age teaches you. Not how to solve more, but how to surrender more. To sit with the unexplainable. To thank the dream for coming, even if it didn't bring a gift. I often told my patients, or I used to when I had them, that the unconscious isn't a puzzle to be solved. It's a language to be listened to. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is nod, smile, and say, "Thank you for the flaming hedgehog." Then pour yourself some tea and let the meaning drift like steam. So many dreams, so little clarity, but so much life between them. That's what matters in the end. Not the interpretation, but the experience. The way a dream can shake your ribs at midnight. The way a line in your journal can make you laugh 20 years later. The way your unconscious insists on speaking, even when you stop listening. It never gives up on you. You know, I used to believe that if I gathered enough symbols, enough stories, enough mandalas, I'd eventually find the center. That still point from which everything radiates. The meaning. The Rosetta Stone of the psyche. Now I think the center was always moving, and the meaning wasn't in the diagrams, but in the act of drawing them. Even the ones I spilled soup on. Especially those. Yes, even those. There's a certain beauty in letting go of the need to interpret. In trusting that your soul knows the road, even if your mind's still looking for street signs. So when people ask me, "Do you understand your dreams now?" I smile and say, "Number." But they understand me. And truly that's enough. That is more than enough. Still with me? Holy archetype, I thought you'd be asleep by now. Your shadow must be taking notes, scribbling diagrams, underlining owl metaphors. But since your eyes are still open, Let me tell you about something strange, something that doesn't belong to dreams, but walks beside them. Not meaning, not clarity, but timing. The moment when life winks back at you, when a symbol leaps off the page and lands unmistakably in the real world. When you think of a long-lost friend and they call you the next day. When your dream of bees becomes a painting in the cafe where you randomly stop. When the universe whispers, "I heard you." I called it synchronicity, and it changed everything. I hope your dreams are just warming up, because this is where things get strange, beautifully strange. Like when a song you've never heard feels like it was written just for you. Or when the same symbol appears in 3 dreams, 2 books, and your grandmother's wallpaper. You start wondering if the universe is winking at you, or if you're just very, very tired. Let's call it synchronicity. I coined the term, mostly because cosmic coincidence sounded like a circus act. But what I meant was something deeper, a meaningful coincidence. 2 things happening at the same time, not because one caused the other, but because they were always meant to meet, like me and the scarab. Ah yes, the scarab. Picture this. I'm sitting with a patient, a brilliant woman, all intellect and precision, but emotionally frozen. She's telling me about a dream she had, of a golden beetle. Just as she says the word, a tapping hits the window behind me. First turn, and there it is, a scarab, in Zurich, out of season, desperate to get in. I open the window, catch it gently, and offer it to her like a sacred relic. Her face softens. Something in her shifts. It wasn't proof. It was permission. Permission for her psyche to breathe again. Was it magic? Number not like fairy tales, but it was meaningful. And meaning, my friend, is the closest thing we humans have to magic. People often ask if I believed in the supernatural. I usually laugh. I believe in the deeply natural. So deep we've forgotten it's there. Synchronicity is not about fortune-telling or ghosts in your fridge. It's about resonance, a pattern behind the pattern, a hum beneath the noise. Sometimes it's subtle. A patient talks about a lost child, and a music box in the hall starts playing by itself. Other times it's absurd, like the man who kept dreaming of broken clocks, and one morning found his entire watch collection shattered. "Did I do it in my sleep?" he asked. I said nothing, because honestly I wasn't sure. But I was sure of one thing. We need wonder. We need awe that doesn't shout, but leans in and whispers, "You're not alone." Synchronicity is the mind and the world shaking hands, not explaining, just acknowledging. You can't force it. The moment you try to make synchronicity happen, it runs away. Like a deer in the forest, it only appears when you're still, when your soul stops tapping its foot, demanding answers. Even now in this strange old age, I still notice. A word on a torn page, a feather in my tea, a child laughing at nothing, and suddenly I remember the dream I had that morning of a lion cub dancing. These small echoes, they aren't facts. They're invitations. The rational part of me still raises an eyebrow, but the rest of me smiles, because synchronicity is the language of the soul before the alphabet, and I would rather be fluent in mystery than fluent in certainty. That's why I kept journals, dozens, full of drawings, symbols, questions I couldn't answer. I didn't write to remember. I wrote to recognize, to map the invisible, to honor what I didn't yet understand. Sometimes I look back and laugh. So many dreams, so little clarity. Maybe I should have just opened a bakery. Jung's Swiss buns and archetypes. Today's special, cinnamon animus. But then again, I'm not sure a croissant could explain why a beetle showed up that day, exactly when she needed it. Number I chose the path of symbols and silence. It led me to strange places, sometimes painful, often humbling, but always filled with that whisper of connection, that secret knowing that the psyche, like the stars, is full of stories we haven't finished reading yet. And now, if you're still here, I have a confession. That old owl on my shelf, the one with the chipped beak and the judging stare, she watches me every night. I pretend she's just decoration. But the truth is, she's been silently reminding me of something I've nearly forgotten. Something small and warm and shy. A piece of me I left behind. But that has never stopped waiting. And that, my friend, brings us back to the beginning. Not the beginning of time, the beginning of you, the child inside, the one who just wants a blanket and maybe some apple pie. She's still watching me, you know. That owl, dusty, chipped, and perched on the highest shelf in my study, just above the fireplace where I keep the mandalas and the forgotten stones. Her eyes haven't blinked in decades, and yet I swear, sometimes she judges me, as if she knows when I've stopped listening, as if she remembers the child better than I do. And maybe she does, because for all the dreams I've chased and all the symbols I've deciphered, the one thing that continues to slip through my fingers like warm milk is that small, trembling voice I first heard when I was 7 or 70. Honestly, it's hard to tell the difference now. You see, your inner child doesn't age. He doesn't care about your salary, your reputation, or your latest paper on Tibetan serpent gods. He wants simpler things, softness, safety, the sound of your grandmother stirring soup, a blanket that smells like summer, the freedom to say, I'm scared, and not be corrected. For me, he always showed up at the strangest times, in dreams mostly, but sometimes in the way I'd suddenly crave cinnamon or want to lie on the floor and watch the light ripple across the ceiling. Once, I caught myself humming a tune I hadn't heard since childhood and wept like a fool. Not because I was sad, but because for a moment I was home. Funny, isn't it? I spent my life trying to build bridges between the conscious and the unconscious. But the deepest connection I ever felt was with a version of me that never learned to spell the word collective. He used to visit me in dreams, that child. Not as I was, but as I could have been. Barefoot, curious, holding a stick like it was a sword. Once, he sat beside me on a swing made of snakes and said, "Don't grow up. It's a trap." I woke up laughing, then crying, then making tea. People talk a lot about healing your inner child these days, but I think it's simpler. You don't need to fix him. He's not broken. You just need to sit with him. Let him eat an apple slowly. Let him scribble nonsense in your journal. Let him ask questions that have no answers. Questions like, why is the moon always watching? What happens to shadows when the light is off? And, my personal favorite, do dreams have dreams? That last one still haunts me. Not because I know the answer, but because part of me hopes they do. Sometimes I think all the work I've done, the theories, the lectures, the red book, and the blue teacups, was just a long way round to come back to that child. to give him the attention he never asked for, but always deserved. One afternoon, I must have been in my 60s, I sat on the floor of my study and drew a picture. Just for me. No analysis, no structure, just crayons and silence. It ended up being a spiral. In the center, a small house with smoke curling out of the chimney, and standing beside it, a child, alone, but not lonely. I don't know what it meant. I didn't need to. That's the secret, really. Not everything needs to be explained. Some things, the best things, simply want to be witnessed. Like an owl who never speaks, or a child who draws stars on the floorboards and calls it safety. Still with me? Good, because now it gets weird. There's a moment, and it comes to everyone eventually, when you realize that the voice inside your head isn't always yours. It's your father's disapproval, your school teacher's sigh, that terrible book you read when you were 13 that made you think being sensitive was a weakness. And beneath all that noise, something else. A whisper. The child again. Only now, he's holding something. A mirror. A stuffed rabbit. A dream. He doesn't say, but he looks at you as if to ask, "Are you ready to remember?" That's when the owl usually shifts. Not much. Just a twitch of the wing, but enough. Enough to remind me that wisdom is not loud. It's feathery. It watches, waits, and rarely says, "I told you so." So yes, sometimes I feel more like a child now in my old age than I did when I was actually one. My joints creak, but my imagination dances. My beard is white, but my laughter is pink. And sometimes, when the wind hits just right, I run down the garden path barefoot, just to see if I still can. And I can. The neighbors think I'm mad. They're not wrong. But it's a sacred madness. A necessary kind. Because in a world that rewards efficiency over wonder, and noise over nuance, choosing to listen to the child, to really listen, is the most radical act of all. So I listen. I listen when he asks me to light a candle just because. I listen when he wants me to sing badly in the bathtub. I listen when he says, "Let's make a nest of pillows and pretend we're in the clouds." Because here's the truth. Your inner child is not a metaphor. He's real. She's real. They live in your gestures, your hesitations, your half smiles when someone offers you a slice of cake. They are the blueprint beneath the blueprint, the soft echo before the scream, and they're tired of being ignored. So if tonight, when you turn off the lights, you feel a presence, something small and curious, don't worry. That's just your forgotten self coming home. Offer them a blanket. Offer them a story. They've been waiting a long time. And me? I've started leaving a cookie out for mine. Oatmeal raisin. He likes raisins for some reason. I don't argue. Tomorrow we might draw again, or build a temple out of socks, or sit in silence and watch the rain whisper secrets on the window pane. But tonight, we rest. Because something stirs now, in the folds of night. Something deeper than the inner child. Something older than any owl. A voice so ancient, it doesn't speak in words. It hums. It pulses. It waits. Close your eyes. The psyche awaits. Close your eyes. Yes, now. Let the weight of the world slide down your spine like warm candle wax. Let your thoughts soften like old pages left too long in the sun. You've done enough thinking for one lifetime. Now, let the psyche speak. Not with thunder, not with slogans, but with hush. Because the unconscious never shouts. It waits, patiently, silently. like a cat beneath a chair, like a myth curled beneath your pillow, purring. Waking life, as you know, is a bit of a performance. We pretend it's linear. We measure it in emails and coffee spoons, appointments and passwords. But beneath all that, another rhythm pulses. Life is not a line, it's a spiral, a dance, a riddle wrapped in daylight. And every time you close your eyes, you return to the real world, the inner world, the place where owls speak Latin and memories glow like underwater lanterns. Carl Jung spent a lifetime exploring that world, not to conquer it, but to befriend it. He walked the labyrinth of the self with reverence, not a flashlight. He mapped dreams, studied symbols, and listened, truly listened, to the stories people carry when they think no one is listening. Stories whispered by the shadow, carried by the anima, and lit from behind by something he dared to call the self. Vast, numinous, patient. He taught us that our strangest dreams are not errors, but invitations, that every fear has a face, and every face is part of us. He taught us that myths are not relics, but road signs, that even the most broken of us carry within the potential for wholeness, not perfection, wholeness, the kind that welcomes contradiction, that makes space for both the saint and the serpent, the child and the warrior, the analyst and the baker who never was. So tonight, don't chase clarity, invite softness. Start by noticing the air, the hum in the quiet, the way it settles in your chest like a forgotten lullaby. Let your name blur at the edges. You don't need it, not where we're going. The psyche doesn't care who you are on LinkedIn. It remembers the scent of your grandmother's kitchen, the staircase you climbed in that dream, barefoot and glowing. It keeps all this in velvet boxes, and when you're soft enough, it opens them. Inside are stories, wild, tangled, nonsensical, but all of them true in a way logic could never capture. Truths with cloaks, truths with claws, truths that speak in spoons and jelly stares. They don't want solving, they want singing. So tonight, if your dream takes you to a cathedral made of feathers or a desert filled with clocks that tick backward, don't interpret. Listen, sip the tea, pet the fox. Let your fears sit beside you yawning. Because I promise you this, you are not broken, you are a labyrinth. And the psyche, your psyche, is the thread. Not to pull you out, but to stay with you while you wander. That's what Jung learned after the theories, the mandalas, the red book, the migraines, the years. That wholeness is not an endpoint. It's a dance with your own contradictions. It's lighting a candle for the parts of you you tried to exile. So let the mind dissolve. Let the blanket become a sky you can fold. Let your sleep become a ceremony. There's nothing to solve, no quiz, no test. Only this quiet, sacred thing, your soul turning a page. And the unconscious, oh, the unconscious, is ready. It has stories to tell you. They may not make sense, but neither does waking life. And that, dear dreamer, is permission. Permission to drift, to not know, to close your eyes and finally gently let go. Let the owl blink. Let the child in you fall asleep with fingers curled around a mystery. Let the stars rearrange themselves to spell your name backwards, just once, for fun. And if you see me out there, older, slower, barefoot in the snow, don't wave. Just nod. I'll understand.